Ok. On va regarder celle-là en dernière vidéo. Donc, c'est les dernières updates de Diablo sont amazing. C'est Force Gaming qui nous fait cette petite vidéo. Cette grande vidéo. Allez, c'est parti.
Sponsored by Ridge,
Ce sera la dernière vidéo qu'on va
compact,
mater.
durable wallets designed to help streamline what you carry around. Stay tuned for later in the video to learn more, and check out the link in the description below. Hey everyone, what's up? It's been a minute, but I'm back, and we got a lot of Diablo 4 news. There's actually been a ton of updates over these past several days. Blizzard appears to be going through a bit of a marketing push right now, doing interviews with gaming news websites, what few of those remain, releasing some of their own video and written content, as well as giving select content creators some exclusive early access, which is cool to see. Yeah, we just got a ton of new news and information.
Quoi? Ah non, il va parler de... Ok,
What I've done here is consolidated, wrapped it all up, and hope to put a nice
ok, donc il va parler de Riker, j'imagine. Donc il a dit en intro, il a dit que voilà, il y a beaucoup de news qui ont débarqué, notamment de créateurs de contenu qui ont eu des accès à des versions. Donc je pense qu'il parle de Riker, qui a fait une vidéo là-dessus. Peut-être qu'il va reprendre ces points-là. Peut-être qu'il va en sortir d'autres, je sais pas.
Relax and let's get right into it. Starting off with Riker, he released a fairly in-depth video detailing Diablo 4's endgame after going hands-on with an early build, making him, with the exception of the developers themselves, the only person on the planet who can actually talk about endgame right now, because everyone else who's played it is under strict NDA.
Ah, ça c'est vrai. C'est que Riker, il est tellement, franchement, à sa place, comme un ouf, quoi. C'est le seul mec qui est autorisé à parler du jeu sur la planète, quoi. Ils ont interdit, ils ont pas soulevé l'accord. Et lui, il arrive, il fait t'inquiète, il se passe ça, capstone donjon, ça se passe comme ça, et patati patato, quoi. C'est ouf, hein.
He got basically a few days of early time. Blizzard flew him out. He got to play an endgame build. They gave him an account that had one of each class, and these were at various stages of progression, ranging from levels 45 to 75, because remember, endgame basically starts as soon as you finish the campaign. So let's start off with capstone dungeons. So after completing the campaign, this is like the final challenge
niveau
to
50,
progress from one difficulty tier into the next. Specifically,
il parle du capstone donjon, justement, la difficulté quand tu arrives niveau 50. Moi, d'après ce que j'ai entendu, hein, t'as rien de tester avant le niveau 50. Le but, c'est d'y aller niveau 50. Les mobs sont niveau 50, hein, et en plus, le boss est chaud. Donc, n'y allez pas level 35, quoi, ça sert à rien.
There is a capstone dungeon as you move from World Tier 2 Veteran into World Tier 3 Nightmare, and then another capstone dungeon going from World Tiers 3 to 4, which is Nightmare to Torment.
Alors là, on est sur un druide. Ça me fait peur, hein. Le mec, il est druide. Juste, je regarde, j'étais un petit peu absorbé par les images, hein. Le mec, il est druide level 50. Et il envoie pas vraiment la sauce, hein.
And then another
il fait des crits à 1000. Là, il a claqué un 8000, c'est ça? Il a claqué un 8000. Level max 50 durant la prochaine bêta? Ouais, c'est ça. Ouais. Level 100 max prochaine bêta. En fait, il y a d'abord une toute petite bêta où tu seras à level max 20. Et la prochaine bêta qui est après, c'est level max 100. Il n'y a pas de level 50. Non. La fumée, c'est juste... ils nous ont réduit les trucs. Non, là, on est sur un extrait de jeu d'un mec qui fait le capstone donjon, donc le fameux donjon que tu as besoin de terminer pour changer la difficulté du jeu. C'est ça. Et donc les monstres sont tous niveau 50. Donc lui est niveau 50 aussi. Donc là, on voit même, il a les barres pour les prochains points par rangon. Tac, tac, tac. Et voilà quoi. Si dans leur build, il y a au moins de loot, ça se comprend, notamment avec la résistance des mobs, puisqu'elle très vite à des niveaux. Ouais, mais là, tu vois, j'aurais bien aimé savoir comment il est stuff le mec. Au niveau 50.
From World Tiers 3 to 4, which is Nightmare to Torment, with Torment being the final World Tier difficulty that the game's going to have at release. Now, these capstone dungeons, Riker said, are significantly more difficult.
Parce que là en gros, hein, le mob qui est là, ça fait 10 secondes, 15 secondes qu'il tape, il lui a enlevé 10%, hein. Encore 10%, ouais.
Then Nightmare Dungeons and presented a real challenge. He tried the level 50 capstone dungeon with his level 35 rogue and said it was incredibly difficult. He kept on dying over and over again just to elite packs, and really he just couldn't complete it at first. So he went back, he respec'd a few times, upgraded all.
Donc là, il explique un petit peu ce que Riker a vécu. Il avait un rogue level 45 qui était full stuff. Par contre, il se faisait rouler dessus et il a dû d'abord PEX, après respect, changer son stuff, etc., s'améliorer parce que ça passait pas.
All of his gear, and then after a few tries was finally able to clear it. What's of note though is in the capstone dungeons there is a final boss which is meant to be sort of like a pinnacle challenge for each of the world tiers. It even had some one-shot mechanics which caused him a bit of trouble, but again after some finagling and changing things up he was able to clear it. He then went on to say that when he tried the world tier 3 capstone dungeon to progress to world tier 4, the experience was a whole lot smoother, and that dungeon was level 75 and the character he was playing was also level 75.
Donc il y a deux donjons pour passer du niveau voire tier 2 à 3 et de 3 à 4. Il y en a un qui est niveau 50, l'autre qui est niveau 75. Et les donjons sont plus durs que les niveaux qui sont derrière, qui le débloquent.
So it does seem that if you are of the equivalent level, the capstone dungeon should be a lot easier. However, even being of the same level, he said that the boss fight was still quite difficult. He had to learn the mechanics and really pay attention to avoid taking significant damage. It was enough of a challenge. Going through these capstone dungeons were enough of a challenge that he would suggest that hardcore players actually try it on softcore first. Of course, as you...
Okay, il reprend ce que disait... ouais. Pour l'instant, il reprend beaucoup ce que disait Riker. Il récapitule un peu ce qu'il disait en disant que il s'est fait attraper par le boss qui conseille aux joueurs hardcore de faire d'abord du softcore pour apprendre les mécaniques.
You and I both know people who play hardcore are lunatics. I say that in the most endearing way possible. They ain't gonna try softcore first. They're gonna be going as soon as the game launches, even with the servers dying constantly. These people are gonna be in there playing hardcore. But yeah, the main point was Capstone.
La première semaine, je pense que le jeu il va être en vrac. Et ça va être normal. Si franchement le jeu n'est pas en vrac, la première semaine, c'est GG à... Soit tout le monde a déserté le jeu, soit GG à Blizzard parce que... Et faire du hardcore dans ces conditions-là, mais... les gens ils vont se faire déco, ils vont revenir, le personnage n'existe plus, quoi.
Dungeons are meant to present a real challenge. They are the blockade as you move up the world tiers. So after completing the first capstone dungeon and you progress from world tiers 2 to world tier 3, which is nightmare difficulty, that is when more of the endgame activities open up. And he talked a bit about the nightmare dungeons and the hell tides. So starting with nightmare dungeons, we of course know that these are the hard mode version.
Donc le premier donjon, c'est le truc le plus important du jeu en vrai, parce que c'est ça qui te commence le jeu. Tu débloques toutes les activités intéressantes, les bounties, les vagues infernales. Franchement, si tu arrives sur des vagues infernales où tu es tout seul, tu arrives à te démerder tout seul sur les premières heures du jeu, mais tu vas te gaver. Tu vas te gaver en vrai. Donc, c'est intéressant, quoi. Donc, faire ce donjon-là assez rapidement, ça va être la porte ouverte sur de l'accélération de ton personnage en termes de progression.
Of dungeons. This is like one of the main endgame activities. They require nightmare sigils that will boost the dungeon level, while also adding affixes for both the monsters and the dungeon itself. Now, Riker didn't actually expand upon this in the video, but we did see from the screenshot that he showcased a few examples of what these types of modifications can be. So, for example, for monster affixes, we saw stuff like the monsters can be enhanced with various types of elemental damage, they can have their attack speed increased, they can have their resistances increased, or they can gain the unstoppable buff, making them immune to crowd control. But then we also saw some of the names of the dungeon affixes. So one that we saw was called Nightmare Portal. This looks to be the portals that were just...
Donc là, il parle des donjons du cauchemar et des affixes qu'on peut trouver dans les donjons du cauchemar qu'on voyait sur les emblèmes Là, voilà, c'est un portail qui fait pop des démons.
Described in a previous endgame video from Blizzard that will
En
just
plus des monstres
periodically
habituels.
appear as you're going through a nightmare dungeon, summoning in new monsters from other locations in the world. We also saw affixes for something called Stormbane's Wrath. Now, through some leaks, we did learn that there was a nightmare dungeon affix where lightning strikes would periodically come down that could potentially one-shot you. That could be what the Stormbane's Wrath one is referring to. And there was also an affix for Blood Blister, and I'm just going to make a guess here that this is something like random explosions of blood appear on the ground.
Là, il parle de, voilà, d'un autre affix qui fait simplement des explosions aléatoires au sol.
That you have to avoid. I don't know, maybe something like this. But it is really cool to see that the nightmare dungeons are not just enhancing the monsters, but also adding an additional mechanic layer on top of the dungeon experience.
Alors ça, c'est le truc le plus intéressant, je pense, des donjons du cauchemar. C'est ce qu'il dit. Il dit que, en fait, ce qui est intéressant, c'est que c'est pas simplement des dégâts en plus, tout bête. Ça ajoute une autre mécanique dans le donjon et ta manière de faire le donjon, elle va changer. Par exemple, le fait que tu dois être constamment en mouvement ou que tu dois rentrer dans une bulle pour être au corps à corps pour tuer un monstre, etc., etc., alors que tu n'as pas l'habitude. Donc, chaque mécanique va changer un petit peu ta manière de jouer.
I love to see it. So the nightmare dungeons come with as well limited numbers of revives, and if you die too many times, you will then fail the dungeon, basically just losing your key and missing out on any rewards at the end. So it does seem like as you move higher up these sigil tiers, they allow fewer revives, and these do appear to be tied to the world tiers as well. And I'll tell you, as soon as you get to being limited.
Là, il parle du nombre de vies qu'on a quand on fait un donjon du cauchemar. On peut ressusciter plusieurs fois, et plus on va monter dans la difficulté du donjon, plus le nombre de fois va être restreint.
To just 4 revives, that's really gonna make people need to pay attention.
Ça va de 12 pour les premiers jusqu'à 4 pour les plus compliqués.
Now, they did something basically similar to this in Function in Diablo 3, where whenever you died, it would put you further and further behind the timer as you're trying to fill up the bar before the timer expires so that you can get those bonus enhancements to your gem.
Alors là, il compare à Diablo 3 et en fait, moi, je pense que je préfère la manière de Diablo 3. Comme on avait un timer sur Diablo 3, le fait de mourir, ça t'ajoute du temps, donc potentiellement des chances de ne pas le faire, de ne pas le terminer. Et ça rajoute un peu d'excitation dans le jeu parce que des fois tu y crois, si tu joues, tu te dis allez, j'y joue bien, je peux réussir à récupérer du temps. Et donc tu peux te retrouver dans des situations où soit tu termines le donjon avec quelques secondes et du coup tu es très content et ça t'excite parce que tu as réussi, soit tu es très dégoûté parce que tu l'as foiré à quelques secondes aussi. Et donc du coup ça rajoute ce côté un peu palpitant. Et alors que là, on a simplement un nombre de manières, nombre de fois où tu peux ressusciter et après terminer. Moi, je préférais la manière Diablo 3 voilà, pour limiter justement le nombre de resurrects que tu peux faire.
They're doing something like this, but actually just having a hard fail state from it. Or at least I'm assuming it's a hard fail state. Maybe that's not the case. I actually don't know if we've got clarification if the revive limitations are referring to bonuses that you can get if you go within those limits, or if it's just going to kick you out of the dungeon after you reach it. I'm assuming the former, but I'm actually not certain at the moment. But either way, there are revive restrictions that are going to have some consequence tied to them. So from his experience,
en vrai, pour les revives, le nombre de manières où on peut ressusciter, il ne l'a pas dit là, mais une info qui est importante, c'est que si tu es dans un groupe à plusieurs et que tu restes ton pote, ça compte pas dans ce timer-là. Tu restes autant de potes que tu veux. C'est vraiment les full wipe, quand tout le monde est mort, que ça va compter. J'adorais les failles dans D3. En vrai, dans D3, les failles étaient, l'idée de la faille était bien, était super. Par contre, ce qui manquait, c'est pouvoir set la faille, pouvoir influencer sur la faille. Et en fait, la manière des maps de PoE est une très bonne chose, tu vois. Tu donnes des affixes, ça donne des loots en plus, ou des... Voilà. Et ça, c'est ça. Ça, il manquait un petit peu ce côté-là dans Diablo 3. Et là, ils l'ont rajouté un petit peu avec justement ces affixes que tu vas pouvoir gérer. soit tu vas faire la map, soit tu vas pouvoir la désenchanter pour en refaire une autre, quoi, pour la recrafter une autre, quoi. Du coup, les joueurs hardcore peuvent revive. Ouais, c'est ça. Ouais. C'est ça.
It looks
Tout à
like
fait.
early on
Même
we
en
will be
PvP.
getting nightmare sigils, which are like the keys to activate the nightmare dungeons, specifically from the Tree of Whispers, which is like the game's bounty system or quest system. You're also able to craft sigils. These are random, but basically after breaking sigils down, you're rewarded sigil powder, and then with that powder, you can craft a different difficulty tiers, and it's going to give you a random dungeon sigil. You don't know exactly which one you're going to get, but you.
Donc là, pour le craft, là, il parle du craft des emblèmes. Donc il dit, s'il y a des trucs qui t'intéressent pas, tu peux les rendre en tant que poudre. Et quand tu as un certain nombre de poudres, tu vas pouvoir crafter un item, un autre emblème d'un certain niveau. Donc ça, c'est bien parce que c'est une très bonne mécanique, parce que les affixes que tu ne peux pas faire ou qui sont insupportables à faire, tu vas pouvoir les changer dans quelque chose qui t'intéresse et d'un niveau plus intéressant qui te correspond, quoi. Ça, c'est cool.
We'll get one within a range. Now, one interesting note that Riker mentioned here is that of the 100+ dungeons that are going to be in the game at release, apparently only 30 of them will be eligible for the nightmare variations with every season. So in the first season, which is scheduled sometime shortly after launch, we're going to have 30 dungeons that can be upgraded to nightmare variants, and then 90 plus or something like that can't be, and they'll just always be normal dungeons. And then come season 2, there will be a new list of 30 potential nightmare variants of the total 100+ dungeons in the game. Now, I gotta say, I am really surprised by this, and I'm a bit baffled as to why exactly they're choosing to have a restriction and a limit of which dungeons can have nightmare dungeons in each season. My first thought was maybe they're doing this to prevent people from running the same most efficient dungeon over and over again, but then I realized that can't be the reason, because we can't just handpick which dungeon we're doing a nightmare variant of, because we rely on whatever nightmare sigils we get, and which ones we get are completely random. So it's a bit confusing as to why exactly they're choosing to do it this way. I'm not sure what their justification is for wanting to limit. They're just basically taking the pool of potential variation of the end game in a season and cutting it by like a third, at least when it comes to the nightmare dungeons in particular. There are, of course, other end game activities that we will be doing as well, but I'm a bit confused, and I'd be interested to hear what their like philosophy is behind doing that restriction. It seems odd to me. It seems not good, frankly. At least that's my gut reaction. Okay, so
donc là, en fait, tout simplement, il disait que le fait de ne pas avoir l'option d'avoir tous les donjons avec les emblèmes, c'est un peu bizarre. Et il y a une restriction qu'il aimerait comprendre, il aimerait savoir quelle est la philosophie derrière ça. Parce que pour lui, c'est tout simplement nul, quoi, de ne pas pouvoir faire tous les donjons via les emblèmes.
So next up, there are Hell Tides. As we know, Hell Tides will take a part of a zone and completely take it over, buffing the monsters within that region, adding new types of monsters, raining down fire, and then also providing a unique resource to farm for. Specifically, as we kill enemies within the Hell Tides, we are rewarded with cinders, and then those cinders can be cashed in at Hell Tide Chest. And this is a great way to farm for specific pieces of gear, specific gear slots, because every Hell Tide chest will clearly show you exactly what type of gear is inside of it. So you can see if it's a helm, if it's a sword, if it's pants, whatever. Also in the Hell Tides will be roaming bosses. We've seen some examples of this in various videos that have released, as well as what he called a unique boss that has its own unique chest. This is kind of like a spoiler territory. It's meant to be like a really, really difficult challenge.
Ok, donc toujours la même info sur les vagues infernales. Il va y avoir des monstres à tuer, on récupère des cendres. Les cendres, on ouvre les coffres nous disent qu'est-ce qu'il y a dans le coffre, et il va y avoir un boss avec un coffre particulier dans la zone qu'il va falloir défoncer. Le boss va défoncer, donc ça va être intéressant.
But if you can overcome it, apparently we'll have some awesome rewards. There are also going to be public events that are unique to the Hell Tides. These are varied from the typical events that were in that zone prior to the Hell Tide. And then one big thing that he confirmed, we heard about this from leaks from the endgame beta, but now we have like an official announcement of it, is the Hell Tides are going to be rotating 1 hour on, 1 hour off. We did
Donc
learn, I should
les vagues
mention, that at
infernales, il y
any
aura
given time, there
toutes les
will be
2 heures.
2 zones within all of the zones in the world that will have a hell tide taking place in them when it is toggled on. So
Une
you'll
heure
have,
off,
say,
une
from
heure on.
7 a.m. to 8 a.m., there will be hell tides. 2 areas will have hell tides in them. And then from 8 to 9, no hell tides. And then from 9 to 10, hell tides are back into new areas. Now, this time gating is pretty common in online live service games. It's also what they're doing with the world bosses as well as the zone-wide, zone public events. All of this stuff is on a predetermined schedule. Now, odds are there will be websites, third-party sites out there that track the timers for this stuff, because in-game, you're only given a heads up just prior to the event happening. Now, design-wise, I assume their reason behind doing this is to stop people from farming these particular activities non-stop, so that people can't just farm the world boss over and over, or farm hell tides, or farm the zone event. It does really suck for people with limited play time. Like, if you're one of those people who can only manage to hop in for 30 minutes or an hour.
Là, il parlait du fait, ça me saoule chaque fois cet argument. Il parlait du fait que les Helltide, les vagues infernales, pop 1 heure, après pendant 1 heure il n'y a rien, après ça revient. Et il dit voilà, ça quand même pour ceux qui ont un temps de jeu limité, ça pue. En vrai, si tu as un temps de jeu limité, que tu peux jouer que de 17h30 à 17h40, tu feras pas des Helltide, tu feras autre chose, tu as d'autres choses à faire. Voilà quoi. Tu joues 1 heure, tu vas manger, te laver, l'heure après, tu joues 1 heure, tu vas faire une sieste 45 minutes, tu joues 1 heure. Voilà, c'est ça, il faut s'organiser quoi.
At a time, and you just happen to be playing when the world boss isn't active, when the hell tide isn't active, and those are things you want to do. That really sucks. I do think one possible remedy for this would be for them to have the bosses, the hell tides, and the public events constantly up, but balance out the rewards that you get across activities, or just limit them so that you can't get the big rewards from each of these things but once every hour, whether it's a particular resource, a particular piece of gear, a particular consumable, whatever it is. They're trying to limit players from amassing quickly by farming things over and over again.
Alors,
they can put those restrictions
on va prendre cet argument un peu au sérieux, ok? C'est de la merde comme argument et je vais vous montrer pourquoi. Là, il est en train de dire que on a une activité qui fait 1 heure ok, 1 heure pas ok. Ça veut dire que sur les 24 heures de la journée, il y a 12 heures où l'activité va être opérationnelle et il y a 12 heures où elle ne va pas être là. Ok ? Il part du principe que les gens qui jouent moins ne vont pas avoir les loots du Helltide. Alors, sachant que pendant les vagues infernales, il y aura plus de loot, et pendant qu'il n'y a pas les vagues infernales, il y aura moins de loot. Et bien en fait, ils auront autant de loot qu'un mec qui joue pareil. C'est-à-dire 50% de leur temps de jeu, en moyenne, va être boosté, et 50% de leur temps de jeu, en moyenne, ne va pas être boosté. Il ne faut pas partir du principe que les mecs qui vont se connecter, pas beaucoup, vont uniquement se connecter pendant les heures où le Helltide et enfin les vagues infernales sont off. Ça se trouve, il y a un mec qui va se connecter uniquement quand le jeu est up. Ça veut dire que potentiellement, il va jouer moins de temps et il va avoir à chaque fois de très bons loots. Donc, faut stopper, faut arrêter de dire que les mecs qui vont jouer moins, ils vont se faire arnaquer par cette mécanique. C'est une mécanique qui fait 50-50. On peut très bien dire qu'il y a un mec qui va se connecter que quand les Helltide seront off, mais un autre mec qui va jouer le même nombre d'heures de jeu pourrait se connecter que quand c'est on. Et donc, du coup, t'en as un qui va looter 3 fois plus que l'autre. Et pourtant, ils auront le même temps de jeu. Et donc, à partir du moment où la mécanique est partagée à 50% du temps, c'est faux de dire qu'un mec... Alors, c'est ça. Oui, un mec qui va jouer moins qu'un autre aura moins de loot, mais ça, c'est normal. Par contre, c'est pas parce que tu te connectes moins que tu vas te connecter que à des heures où ça va pas looter.
Without completely eliminating those events, and this will make it so that people who only have 30-minute windows can still do those things when they have those 30 minutes, but then the people who are playing 12 hours a day, no lifing the game, they will be paced out and they can't just routinely farm over and over and over again. I think that...
Là, il compare un mec qui joue 30 minutes avec un mec qui joue 12 heures par jour. Le mec qui joue 12 heures par jour, il va très facilement se retrouver à 50% du temps avec le truc on et 50% avec le truc off. Le mec qui joue 30 minutes par jour, s'il se connecte quand c'est on, tout son temps de jeu, il sera 100% boosté. Parce qu'il sera toujours en L-tide. Est-ce que c'est normal? Est-ce que c'est... on peut très bien dire non. Attends, il a... Même s'il a 30 minutes de jeu, il devrait avoir lui aussi 50% de son jeu, son temps de jeu est boosté et pas boosté. Donc non, c'est sur le nombre d'heures total, ça sera équilibré et je vois pas pourquoi les gens se plaignent.
That's a potential solution if that is the particular reason behind what they're doing here. The Paragon board, I was actually really excited to hear him talk about this. So he was talking about the fact that each board has a legendary node, which we knew that. Each particular board is basically built around that node, and that the nodes themselves are essentially better versions of legendary aspects with a lot of different supporting nodes to play into that. This is basically just like getting another piece of gear, but then offering some customization within the path that you take and which particular powers you take. And then you add the glyph system on top of that, where you're going to be putting these glyphs in, and then there's going to be a radius depending on the strength of the glyph, the rarity of the glyph, that even further boosts you up. It just, the Paragon board system sounds a lot more interesting now after he described how it works and kind of how it functions towards player progression. Just a couple other notes here from the video that I want to...
Ok, donc là, il parlait du système Parangon, il expliquait un petit peu comment ça fonctionnait, il déplace sur les cases, il y a des bonus sur chaque tableau Parangon, il y a une sorte de thème qui dépend. Je pense que c'est pas le tableau dépend du légendaire, je pense que le légendaire dépend du tableau. Mais c'est pas grave. En tout cas, chaque tableau a un thème principal qui est dans le même style que le légendaire. Et donc, du coup, on va pouvoir s'orienter là-dessus et bénéficier des glyphes sur le chemin.
To touch on, at one point mentioned that Blizzard told him there was no best experience farming activity. Like when it comes to all the things you can do in endgame, everything is going to reward equal experience. Of course, as we know, that is never the case. The player base will find which activity gives the best experience.
Donc là, il parlait du fait de gagner de l'expérience. Il disait que c'est une blague, quoi, que comme si toutes les activités allaient rapporter le même nombre d'expérience. Non, c'est complètement faux. On sait que c'est jamais possible. Et il y a forcément des manières de gagner de l'expérience plus faciles que d'autres et plus rapides que d'autres. Et les gens vont trouver, et les gens vont communiquer, et les gens vont le squatter.
Experience per hour, even if it is just like 5 to 10% better than anything else, and that will be then considered the ideal method of experience farming. Just like in Diablo 3, you had like the chest farming, trying to get the bonus chest, and the massacre bonus runs that you would do. There will be something that's, even if it's just slightly better than everything else, that players will figure out. We're going to find the efficiency because that's what we do. So that is a bit...
Donc voilà, ce qu'il disait, c'est que les gens veulent farmer l'efficacité. Et dès qu'il y a un truc, même si c'est 5% plus, eh ben, les gens vont le faire. Et les gens vont spam. Que ce soit ramassage de gold, ou de l'XP, ou drop de légendaire. Voilà, pour chacune de ces facteurs-là, s'il y a une méthode particulière pour être plus performant, ça sera squatté.
Bit of a recap as well as expanding upon certain things, although I do suggest checking out Riker's video if you want to hear it straight from the source. Oddly enough, though, he didn't really touch on a few major endgame systems. Like, he didn't talk at all about world boss farming. Maybe they didn't want him to spoil the world bosses in the other zones, who knows. He didn't touch on Fields of Hate.
Alors là, il dit que Riker n'a pas parlé du farming des world boss. À mon avis, il n'y aura pas de farming de world boss. Je pense que même dès la bêta qu'on va jouer là, les world boss pourront se faire qu'une seule fois.
Hatred at all, and he barely talked about Tree of Whispers other than to say that's how you get your first Nightmare Sigils, although I guess there's really not much to say about Tree of Whispers because it is just a bounty quest system. But I wanted to hear more about world bosses, and I definitely wanted to hear about the PvP, the Fields of Hatred, so I am hopeful that he makes a follow-up video talking and diving into some of this stuff as well, so long as Blizzard isn't preventing him from doing so, or maybe the build that he played didn't have it in it, didn't have those things, or he just didn't spend his time focused on those things, who knows. Anyways, let's move on to the next story. But first, a word from today's sponsor, Ridge Wallet. By now, you most certainly know them. They've been sponsored thanks to this pocketer carbon fiber link in the time. Lead class designer of Diablo 4, Adam Jackson, waded into the respec cost debate discussing Blizzard's current...
Ça aussi, là, il va parler du fameux débat pour les coûts de la respect. Je pense que c'est un non-débat que les gens paniquent pour rien. Voilà.
Philosophy on this particular issue. He said, "Our vision for respec is that we have to balance this idea that we want players to commit to a fantasy and a character and have actual weight and meaning to their choices, but we also want them to feel free to customize their character and explore and try different builds and fantasies and ways to play. Where we've landed on that is that earlier in the game, it is very cheap, basically to the point that it's essentially free to respec your character and change around your build and experiment what you do. And then when you get to the really late game, we do want you to start to optimize and focus on a build and focus on a real fan."
Ok. Donc l'idée, en fait, c'est de pouvoir permettre en début de jeu de pouvoir tester un maximum de skills, un maximum de chemin pour les builds. Mais quand on arrive vers le milieu, fin de game, eh ben, que tu es une spé, voilà, tu t'orientes sur une spé et que tu arrêtes de changer changer comme une girouette.
Fantasy, so you have that identity of I am a werewolf druid or I am a blood casting magic necro. They keep talking about this fantasy stuff, and I just gotta tell you, I just really couldn't care less. I'm not interested in the fantasy of my spec and my build. I'm more into the fantasy of my class, and my class has all of these different possibilities, and I really would just love to have reasonable access to all of those possibilities and not be restricted because they want me to have a build fantasy that, you know, let's be honest here, a build fantasy that's just tied to whichever gear that I happen to get dropped. And then when I get a new piece of gear drop, I've got a new fantasy. I've got a new fantasy now, and now I want to go towards that fantasy. So I got to farm for however many hours. Although I don't.
Alors là, il dit un truc qui est assez intéressant, c'est que dans la vision de Blizzard, ils veulent te pousser vers une manière de jouer, enfin, ils veulent que tu choisisses une manière de jouer et que tu continues là-dedans. Là, il est en train de dire, moi, dès que j'ai un nouveau loot, j'ai envie de changer de spé et pouvoir m'adapter, et voilà, je suis parti sur un autre délire, quoi. Et en vrai, bah, ça va être moyennement possible, ça. Je sais pas, ça va être possible de pouvoir changer de spé dès que tu as un loot. Je pense que déjà, pour changer de spé, il faut plusieurs légendaires. Donc déjà, c'est pas tout de suite. Et quand tu le fais, c'est lourd de conséquences. Et ça doit être lourd de conséquences.
I don't want to lean into that too hard right now because we don't know how many hours, and that's something that really.
C'est ça. Et il parle d'un nom, il dit, je veux pas farmer pendant des heures. Mais il dit, là, en fait, je vais pas trop en parler parce qu'en fait, je sais pas à combien d'heures ça correspond de farming. Ça se trouve, en 2 heures, tu as ramassé assez de thunes pour faire 3 full respect. On sait pas.
Isn't likely to be settled until release. A couple other quotes here. Last bit was he said, as far as the idea of making everything free forever, I don't think that we're going to be going down that direction anytime soon, but this is a live service game and we are going to continue to listen to feedback from the community. And honestly, our goal over time is to make the best game possible. So whatever we feel best for players, yada, yada, yada. When it comes to the respec stuff, I think too expensive is just generally bad. I feel like they need to make sure they don't make it so prohibitive that someone feels the pressure to re-roll a character just because they find a new item that makes them want to try out a new build, because honestly, who's got time for that? Come on, let's be honest. Well, maybe we do. We're RPG players after all, and MMO players after all. So
ouais, en fait, il est en train de dire qu'on n'a pas envie de faire des rerolls pour avoir une spé. On n'a pas envie d'avoir un barbare Whirlwind, un barbare Tourbi, un barbare Marteau des Anciens, un barbare Soulèvement. On veut avoir un perso et pouvoir tout faire avec. Ce qui est un peu vrai. Mais bon, si le coût de la respect est vraiment trop élevé, j'ai peur que ça fasse perdre patience aux moins chevronnés, on va dire.
we got plenty of time to game. And beyond the excuse of class fantasy, I assume one of the big reasons why they want to put limitations on respecing, and I think this is understandable, is to stop people from constantly changing specs for various activities, so that like they got a spec for nightmare dungeons, and then they got a spec for world bosses, and then they got a spec for PvP, and every time they go between focusing on those, they feel the desire to change up their spec completely, which, as we know, will take a bunch of time, unless of course they do templates, and maybe that is an answer as well. If they want to keep these restrictions where we're not constantly swapping things around, it would be great if they had like loadouts, right? So give us like 2 loadouts. Maybe I can have a PvP loadout and a PvE loadout, because I don't want to have to roll another class, especially as we know how long it's supposed to take, how many hundreds of hours it's supposed to take for those classes to eventually reach max level.
Alors là, il dit un truc qui me plaît parce que c'est un peu vrai. Quand les gens font une activité, ils aiment bien optimiser cette activité. Donc, si c'est une activité plutôt de farming de monstres, on va dire simple, il y a un build pour ça. Si c'est une activité pour farmer du boss, il y a un build pour ça. Et donc, du coup, ce qui va être un challenge pour les gens, c'est qu'il va falloir trouver des builds qui soient compétitifs dans l'ensemble des activités. Et pas simplement farmer du boss, tu vois. Tu peux pas. Il va falloir trouver des trucs qui soient et pour le farming de monstres sympa, je veux dire faible, et que ce soit rapide. Donc il va falloir et de la mobilité forcément et de la vitesse. Et il va falloir quelque chose qui tape en single target, en mono-cible très fort, parce que tu vas te retrouver sur des boss. Donc tout ça, c'est à prendre en compte et il va falloir monter un build qui répond à tout ça en même temps. Et en termes d'XP, en termes de vitesse, en clear speed, etc., etc. Donc il va y avoir plusieurs critères qui fait qu'un build va être sympa ou pas. Est-ce qu'il est dépendant du stuff? Est-ce qu'il y a du leveling? Est-ce qu'il c'est pour du leveling? Est-ce que ça a un clear speed intéressant? Est-ce que ça a du mono-target intéressant? Etc., etc. Donc, est-ce que ça a de la survie? Est-ce que, voilà, tous ces éléments sont à prendre en compte dans un build. Et ça, moi, je trouve ça intéressant parce que, du coup, tu n'es pas sur un build qui tabasse des boss, un build qui va vite, un build qui tanky. Non, il faut un ensemble. Et c'est ça qui fait que, justement, tu vas avoir un perso équilibré, intéressant, qui va pouvoir tout défoncer. Et moi, je suis content, justement, qu'ils restreignent le fait de pouvoir reroll. Parce que tu peux admettre que tu as fait une erreur, mais cette erreur, elle doit avoir un coût. Pas uniquement dire « Ah, dommage, je me suis trompé. Je recommence, je remets mes points. » Non, c'est trop facile.
And max out their Paragon board, and it's a big time investment. And at least I know personally, I will probably be sticking to one class this season and just focusing on progressing them as far as possible. And something else I do want to add here and to consider is that one of the unintended consequences, I feel like, of having these overly restrictive respecs is that it puts pressure on players, and at least some portion of the players, to really not mess things up, or in other words, just to copy meta builds.
Ça, c'est faux. Alors là, il est en train de dire que le fait d'avoir une respect qui coûte cher, ça met la pression aux joueurs pour ne pas leur donner le droit à l'erreur. Il y a un truc, c'est qu'avant le niveau 15, les respects sont gratos. Donc tu peux tester toutes les compétences. Même après le niveau 15, même niveau 20, etc., même niveau 30, même 40, les respects vont être de plus en plus chers, mais à la base, elles vont commencer pas cher. Donc là aussi, tu as toujours la possibilité de tester. Donc, dire aux joueurs, non, tu as la pression parce que tu vas faire si tu fais pas le bon choix, tu vas faire de la merde, tu vas payer cher, c'est faux. Teste avant et rends-toi compte de ce qui est intéressant ou pas.
Bad build, and then because you have that bad build, you're punished because it's going to take longer to get the gold that you need to respec out of that bad build, right? And I feel like that's a process that, at least for...
Mais attends, faire de la merde et être puni pour faire de la merde, je trouve pas ça illogique.
Some players, especially players who are limited on time, will only go through once or twice before they just end up going online and copying builds from various sites. And you know, I know there's a whole portion of the player base out there who say I would never copy a build, and that's just, you're not really playing the game. I like playing the game because I like physically playing the game. The part of the game that I don't care so much about is spending hours trial and erroring things and trying different things to see if they work, and then if they don't work, going back and spending hours trying different things to see if they work. I'd rather just have someone else who spent those 10, 20, 100 hours figuring out which build is ideal for whatever particular...
Alors ça, c'est un peu... Là, ce qu'il vient de dire, c'est un peu tout ce qui se passe avec énormément de joueurs. Les joueurs, ils veulent pas... Ils trouvent pas de plaisir dans la découverte de ce qui fonctionne. Ils veulent du plaisir en utilisant ce qui fonctionne. Ça veut dire qu'ils veulent aller sur des sites, ils veulent regarder des vidéos de trucs qui fonctionnent. Ils mettent la sauce directement et qui fonctionnent. C'est ça. Ils ne veulent pas se prendre la tête à essayer de savoir pourquoi ça fonctionne et qu'est-ce qui fonctionne. Ils veulent juste qu'on leur dise quoi faire.
Activity or for a well-rounded build or for whatever my goals are, and use the time that they sent, like a vampire, sucking the time out of them and using it for my own benefit, and just get to play the game and do the part that I like, which is clicking and moving around and seeing the stuff, but not just... Some people are into it, and I think that's great for those that are, but many people aren't, and they just want something that's going to make them feel like they have a competent build and they can do things and not feel like they're like self-hamstringing themselves by trying something on their own and then being restricted. But again, I do need to emphasize that we have no idea how much gold it's going to end up costing or how long it'll take for the average.
Tout ça pour en conclure, donc il se plaint hein, comme jamais, et tout ça pour en conclure en disant finalement on sait pas combien de gold on va gagner, ça se trouve ça va pas être si dur que ça à respect.
Player to accumulate just by playing normally. I just think it's a fun discussion to have around the design philosophy of respecing and the prohibitive nature of it, or not prohibitive. Where it's going to end up landing, we will not know until release. I know people are like dissecting the amount shown for respecs on various videos and streams, but there's a decent chance that this could or already has changed before that final 1.0 patch and launch. So we'll just have to see where it ends up settling. We got an update this week on hardcore PvP, and it's going to be hardcore. Hardcore mode, of course, refers to the variation of these games where if your character dies for whatever reason, it's done. It is dead for good, deleted, see you later, out of there. Now, Blizzard has confirmed that this will apply to the game's PvP as well. So if you go into Fields of Hatred with a hardcore character, your character dies in that PvP arena to another player, it's dead because you're playing hardcore. Maybe it doesn't seem like a surprise, but there was some consideration that maybe they would make it so that you could freely PvP and then the hardcore element would only be attached to PvE. And there was also precedence for this thought because a few years back in an interview with Mr. Llama SC, Blizzard did state that PvP deaths in hardcore would not result in permanent death. Clearly, that has changed. In general, I'm okay with this, at least in theory, because it's hardcore.
Communiqué comme quoi mourir en PvP hardcore, ça n'était pas une mort permanente.
Hardcore players are there for the hardcore experience, but I do think in practicality, the concern here is that what it ends up just meaning is very few people ever step into Fields of Hatred in hardcore, not just because they could die by getting player killed by someone else, but then you've got things like server issues and glitches and hackers, which, let's be honest, there are hackers in just about every major game. There are going to be hackers in Diablo 4. It's almost there will be hackers. Dying to that would be abysmal, and it just seems like the risk will far outweigh the reward because of that.
Donc ouais, après, alors là, en fait, il parle des hackers qui potentiellement peuvent te tuer. Là, dans Diablo 4, le PvP il va être sur une map. Si tu veux prendre le risque d'aller sur la map, c'est toi qui fais de la merde. Après, s'il y a des hackers qui te défoncent, t'es sur la map. That, especially as players have more and more time invested into their hardcore characters. I think early on, it's not so much of a big deal. In fact, to that point, I would love like low-level hardcore PvP. That sounds amazing to me. I do wonder if Blizzard could do something like bucket players into certain level ranges. So maybe they make it so that they could do like level ranges of 10 as you're working your way up to max level, and they could just bucket players together. So players from 10 to 19 will all play and only show up in their particular instances in the Fields of Hatred, and then players 20.
Donc là, il parle du fait que dans la zone PVP, Blizzard a dit qu'ils allaient regrouper les gens de niveau, de 10 niveaux à peu près. Donc voilà, un level 100 ne pourra pas se retrouver avec un level 30 sur la même map. Ça, c'est une bonne chose. Et donc du coup, il va y avoir des tranches de niveau pour le PvP, pour que ce soit à peu près équilibré.
20 to 29, 30 to 39, etc., etc. Sort of like how World of Warcraft does their battlegrounds. That would stop people from dealing with high-level characters over geared characters, people just way more powerful than them. Now, it's not going to address the concern of glitches, bugs, and hackers killing them in PvP. You know, it is hardcore, so the whole point is high stakes, but I think that balance could be really fun. I know I would do it. Like, I would totally love, like, a level 19 twink PvP hardcore battles. Like, I think that would be a lot of fun. I really do. And that's...
Donc là, il parle des twinks. Il parle des persos genre bas level, overstuff pour leur level, qui vont défoncer d'autres persos. Je sais pas s'il y aura ça. Je pense que rien ne va t'empêcher de gagner de l'expérience. Donc tôt ou tard, tu passeras de niveau 20.
Something that I would personally engage with. But if I'm playing hardcore and I have 100 hours in my character, I ain't stepping in the Fields of Hatred. There's just way too much that could go wrong besides me just getting owned because someone's better than me. There's just too many other potential issues that would just be infuriating beyond belief. I think another middle ground too, something that Liam and I were talking about, was what if they just made it so that a hardcore death moves your character into softcore? I think that's a potential answer. It seems like that could be a reasonable solution for people who want to try hardcore PvP, but not just have their character deleted. Campaign. So we got confirmation that the campaign.
Ok, il y avait une question qui a été posée. C'est pourquoi on passe pas les personnages hardcore en softcore quand ils meurent. En vrai, ça aurait été une solution, mais Diablo n'a jamais fait ça. Sur d'autres jeux, oui. Eux, ils n'ont jamais fait. Eux, c'est plutôt, tu vois ton personnage indisponible sur l'écran des persos qui est mort et tu peux pas cliquer dessus, quoi. Et donc, du coup, c'est un peu l'idée de la mort permanente réelle, tu vois. Et tu revis pas dans le mode softcore, quoi.
Campaign will be roughly 35 hours in total, probably closer to 30.
Okay.
To 25 if you're skipping all the cutscenes like this weirdo here, and that's going to put you around level 45 to 50, as we touched on with Riker. His character finished the campaign at level 45, and then he did the level 50 capstone dungeon, but they did.
Donc apparemment pour la campagne ça terminerait à peu près level 40-45. Ça c'est un truc à savoir, et ça prendrait à peu près une trentaine d'heures, 30-40 heures aussi.
It also say that reaching the max character level of 100 is supposedly going to be taking around 150 hours. So quite a significant amount of time, and probably something that not most people are going to get within every season. It seems like that level 100 character level is going to be like, that's a big milestone to hit. 150 hours, it is over the course of 3 months. That's still a lot of hours. That's a lot of hours to have to sink in every day and every week. For most people who don't just game for a living, or who just don't do anything but game and don't do much else in their free time. So, but it is kind of cool here. We'll have to see if that 150 hour mark is a true estimate, or if the various farming methods, the XP farming that the player base will certainly find, cuts that in half potentially. I mean, honestly, if I know gamers, and I do, I've been one my whole life, when the developer says something takes 150 hours, they're talking about like developer pace, right? They're talking about like casual player pace.
Il parlait du fait que le jeu, enfin, le, le- le- le jeu prendrait 150 heures à peu près pour être niveau 100. Et il dit, bah ouais, ça c'est un petit peu la version casual des gens. En vrai, je pense que le jeu va prendre bien moins que ça pour les joueurs qui jouent un peu, beaucoup. Oui, 150 heures, c'est pour un joueur moyen, un peu casual, qui avance pas forcément rapidement. Je pense qu'en optimisant, on va bien moins vite. Je pense qu'on est plutôt près des 80 heures que des 150.
When the hardcore dudes step in, 50, 60 hours. I'm just throwing out random guesses here. Who knows? But man, you can just find just the most egregious like XP farming exploits. We will. Don't you worry, we will. It's worth noting as well, too, that doesn't mean 150 hours till endgame. You start endgame as soon as you finish the campaign, basically. It's just the max character level is said to take around 150 hours. There was some confusion this past week about when mounts unlock. Initially, there were sites reporting that this happened after completing the campaign. That is not the case. It's been cleared up. They were actually going to unlock mounts fairly early on. It seems like somewhere around Act 2 after completing a specific quest line. So we're going to have mounts pretty early on in the process, which love to see it, especially in this big open world. A couple other things, there were some official Blizzard videos, like they had the Inside the Game Your Class Your Way video. This was a super basic overview of class customization. They talked about like builds and progression. Nothing really significant here, with the exception of about around the 3-minute mark, specifically at 2:54 in the video. We saw a little glimpse of skip campaign. It has been confirmed that this is a feature. After you complete the campaign the first time, you will unlock the ability to skip it on any future character. And I do believe it was also confirmed that this will apply to seasons as well. So leading up to the first season, you finish the campaign. Then once you go into the season number 1, you don't have to play through the story campaign again, and you'll just basically be leveling in D4's version of adventure mode, where you'll go out and you'll do whatever activities you want for resources, for fast experience farming, for whatever, just whatever you feel like doing, basically. They also just today released a gameplay guide.
Sur le bouton de couper la campagne, il y a quelque chose que j'ai pas compris vraiment. J'aimerais bien avoir la réponse, mais je pense qu'on l'aura plus tard, peut-être au Dev Talk la semaine prochaine. C'est si je termine la campagne en mode voilà, saison 0, on va l'appeler. Pendant la saison 1, est-ce que je peux skip la campagne et et directement commencer à jouer. Est-ce que je pourrais aussi directement passer en mode... non, parce que ça va être... En mode War Tier 3, non, parce qu'il faut que je fasse le capstone donjon. Donc je dois être au minimum niveau 50 pour pouvoir passer au War Tier 3.
A focus on monsters, world bosses,
Okay.
and mounts. In it,
Bon, du
we
coup,
saw them
si
cover
l'intérêt
the
de couper la
various
campagne,
monster
je sais pas
families.
s'il y a un
That's just like the
gros
type of
intérêt.
enemies. They also touched
Alors,
on the
actuellement,
elite
c'est pas trop.
affixes, which was kind of cool, breaking down cold, fire, lightning, poison, shadow, and utility. They talked about the special monsters, which are the rare spawns. They also briefly touched on world bosses, real basic stuff, just talking about how it's new to the Diablo franchise. The camera zooms back. They got health bar breakpoints for various phases and the stagger bar. They talked about the treasure goblin. It was real simple, like most of these like PR marketed official Diablo videos are. Riker's video was the far more interesting video that came out this week. They also released a couple new class trailers, which was pretty basic stuff as well. And then the final big thing, of course, that's
Là, il est passé un peu sur toutes les communications qu'a fait Blizzard. Sur des communications d'ordre général, comme il vient de le dire, on n'apprend pas grand-chose. Hein, c'est vraiment des trucs basiques.
Happened over the course this past week is we learned that there's going to be another beta taking place. They're calling this the Server Slam beta, so expect things to not function properly. It's going to be running from May the 12th to the 14th. We're going to have all 5 classes.
Donc, il disait que la semaine prochaine, on va avoir la bêta, qui est supposée de ne pas fonctionner correctement. Donc, ce qui est vrai.
Is available. They changed it from a level 25 cap to level 20, which seems odd. And it's going to have all the other same content as the last beta. We're playing through Fractured Peaks. They're going to have the Ashafa world boss, although thankfully he will be spawning much more frequently than he did in the last test. And there's going to be a new cosmetic reward for defeating Ashava at level 20. So even if you played the last beta, there is a new reward.
Ce qu'on pourra faire à la bêta, donc jouer tout le monde, être niveau 20, jouer toutes les classes, être niveau 20, tuer Ashava,
Ward. So if you want to get that, be sure to hop in and check it out. And that pretty much does it. That is a recap of most of the major news that we had come out over the past 7 days or so.
Pas de grande info sur ce qu'il nous dit. Il arrive après la
some of the other
guerre.
updates that have happened over the
Mais il
past
donne
few
les
weeks.
infos.
I know there hasn't been
Général,
much
on va dire.
D4 discussion here on this channel.